Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be talking about some cultural differences between Australia and Spain. Of course, like any two cultures, Australia and Spain have both similarities and differences, and this can depend on a variety of factors. Every culture has its own politeness rules, social norms, and ways of communicating. So if you're from a different country or cultural background, sometimes these things can seem strange, surprising, or even a little bit rude at first. This is just my personal perspective, of course. I'm sure there's things that I do as an Australian that are considered rude or impolite from the Spanish perspective, but this has been my experience. Okay, so let's dive in. The first one is spatial awareness. This is one of the funniest ones for me retrospectively, but at the beginning I definitely did think it was a little bit rude. But I've gotten used to it and I've realized that it's not a big deal here and it's definitely not a social fumble here. When I first started working in schools, there were a few teachers who would come and stand so close to me. And there were also a few that, if they were trying to communicate something to someone near me, they would come and stand directly in front of me with their back to me. And as an Australian, I did not take this well because that's pretty rude in our culture. And I took it pretty personally at the beginning. And I thought, oh, they're excluding me, or she doesn't like me very much, or this person doesn't want me to know this information. So I would often just move away, just take a few steps away and get myself out of the situation. So after months of this person doing this, I decided to try a little experiment, and I would just hold my position right behind her with her back to me to see if she would realize how strange it was, how close she was standing to me. And that was a failed experiment because she didn't catch on. No one in the room caught on except for me. And so I just decided to abandon my efforts on that front. So I never quite got used to having backs turned to me, or being sort of on the out of the circle. And I did take it really personally at the beginning, and I thought that I was being excluded. But then I slowly started realizing that they all do it to each other as well. It's not just me. So the footpath is another one where the lack of spatial awareness drives me a little bit nuts, because when it's really narrow, they walk close together. But then when the path widens, they spread out, seemingly completely unaware that anybody else has anywhere to be. So it can be really annoying if you're running late for something, but there's no changing it. You have to just go with it, because Spanish people are more focused on their conversations than their surroundings. So the funniest part for me is when there's old ladies in Barrio Salamanca that give me a look as if I'm trying to rob them, when really I'm just trying to pass them. Or you're walking down the street and there's a group of 10 finance bros and they're all having beers around a tiny table, so they naturally spill out into the street. And I'm just trying to pass, but they're looking at me like I'm crashing their party. Another one is people on the metro who stand right in front of the door and then get surprised when they're almost pushed over by commuters coming on and off the metro. And finally, my favorite one is the Spanish stop, as my friends and I call it. And this is when you're walking along, especially on the footpaths, and people just stop so suddenly in the most inconvenient of places with not a care in the world. So it took me quite a while to pinpoint exactly why this frustrates me as an Australian, but I think I have a theory. So, not to be dramatic, but in Australia, a lack of spatial awareness can cost you your life. So we are taught and we grow up naturally sort of scanning our surroundings. So you hear a rustle in the bushes, it could be a venomous snake. You're swimming and you see a fin, it could be a dolphin, but it could also be a shark. Obviously, it's not always that extreme, but I think that we are innately a little bit more aware of our surroundings. Spain, on the contrary, doesn't really have many dangerous animals or plants. So I think one giant cultural difference is that Australians seem to have an innate perception of threats that also extends to having spatial awareness that I think sometimes my beloved Spaniards can lack. So in summary, from my perspective, Spanish people, not all of them, but a lot of them generally have less spatial awareness than what I'm used to, And contrary to our Australian instincts, it's not rude, it's not an intention to exclude you or anything. It's a complete accident. And they are just so carefree and chill, and I think we have something to learn from them in that way. Okay, so the next big cultural difference is touching. Following on from the spatial awareness, I have also found Spanish culture to be a lot more touchy than Australian culture. I think this is also a like me being awkward thing, but it was definitely a huge adjustment at the beginning. So firstly, as I was warned, Spanish people do the double cheek kiss. A lot of my Latin friends just do one kiss, and I prefer hugs. So for the first 2 years of living here, I was constantly trapped in this horrible, awkward interaction of ending up almost nose to nose with someone I had never met. Like in group settings, I wouldn't know where everyone was from, or I wouldn't assume, and I would get stuck in this awkward entanglement of one kiss, two kiss, one hug, fist bump. Like, I was lost. And don't even get me started on jujitsu, people. I'm gonna have to take off the mic to show you what they do.
So some people at Jiu-Jitsu would do like the slap up, dap up shoulder variation, very sporty. Some people would shake my hand and I thought, oh, like, do they know that I'm Australian and they're trying to accommodate me? Some would give me the double kiss if it was the first time they were meeting me, which for me in a sport context was like pretty strange. And then also some people just fist bump.
Sometimes the like dap up and shoulder pat to me looks like a hug. So like I go in with two arms and I just hug people. Still to this day, I don't know if it's a joke or not, but I just hug my coaches because I just got so tired of trying to understand which greeting or goodbye they were going for. So I just hug people. And similarly with my friends, like sometimes we do the kiss on the cheek, but mostly I just hug them because I'm like, I don't know what you guys are doing, but I'm doing hugs. So bring it in. But yes, the general touching. I have definitely misinterpreted some signals here. There's, something like the lingering shoulder pat or the lingering arm grab or the patting you while they're talking to you and we're hee hee ha haing. But there's definitely been some times where I've thought like, we're at work, like what's going on here? Like why are you touching me? But I've gotten used to it, and it's not perceived in the same way here as it is in Australia. But I will tell you an instance where it does annoy me, and it's working with kids and when they're sick and they're not washing their hands and they're touching you all the time. I can't count the amount of times I've been sneezed on, they've coughed directly into my open mouth, or like their boogers have literally landed on me, and I know they're not washing their hands, and it's rough out here. But yeah, in general, I have found Spanish kids to be more affectionate with their teachers than Australian kids. So instead of like high fives or like head scratches or blowing kisses, like they prefer hugs and kisses. So I draw the line at hugs. Luckily, I'm very tall, so they can't reach my cheek. And now that I'm in kindergarten, the kids don't they're not taller than my hips, so they can't reach me. And so that's how I avoid the germs as well. But yeah, in general, I have found Spanish people, adults and kids, to be more warm, open, and affectionate. And it's not that Australians can't be this way or that we're not this way. I just think that we're not so initially touchy and affectionate with people that we don't know as well. The next cultural difference is an important one, and it is one that does cause a lot of misunderstandings. So Spanish is a high context language, and English, especially in Australia, is a low context language. So what does that mean? In communication theory, Spanish is one of the languages that is considered to be a high context language, which means people are often reading between the lines. They rely more on tone, body language, the pre-established relationship, shared understanding, or the situation in which the communication is taking place. English, especially in countries like Australia, is considered to be low context because people rely on the direct message and explicit communication rather than the implied meaning. It's the old saying, say what you mean and mean what you say. The idea is basically that communication is more direct and the meaning is carried in the words that we actually use rather than implied. So this is not to say that Spanish people never speak directly or that English speakers never speak indirectly. It definitely happens. It just means that we have these patterns of communication that show up more frequently. So it can be hard for Spanish learners to read between the lines, and vice versa, it can also be hard for English learners to be spoken to in such a direct way. So, when these two communication styles meet, misunderstandings are bound to happen. And how does this manifest in my case? So, when I first arrived, I noticed that people were constantly repeating themselves to me, and I took it personally and I thought, like, do they think I'm stupid? The answer is no. But the reverse is also true, and I found people asking me to repeat myself a lot, and I was thinking, is that necessary? Because I mean what I say, and I said what I mean. Anyway, but eventually you get used to it. And as I quickly realized, people repeating themselves all the time was actually incredibly useful for me learning Spanish. So, from a language acquisition perspective, it was extremely beneficial for me to hear the same phrases over and over again. And even working in early education, having the kids ask me the same question over and over again was really useful. So, in summary, I don't always know what's going on in Spanish conversations because I'm often missing this unspoken context. But they're also very friendly, so you can just ask them to clarify, and they're always happy to do so. Carrying on from high context and low context languages, another key difference for me was the difference between individualist and collectivist societies. Individualistic societies tend to place more emphasis on personal independence, individual goals, and personal path. For me, this rings true for Australia.
Well, I should say post-colonisation modern Australia, because of course, things were not always this way.
Like, obviously, we care about family, friends, and we have community, but I do think that we lean towards the individualistic side of the scale. Collectivist society tend to place more emphasis on family, community, group harmony, and social responsibility. Decisions may be influenced more by what is best for the group rather than what is best for the individual. Of course, no country is completely one or the other. Every country and culture has individualist and collectivist elements, but some societies just lean more strongly in one direction. So, in my experience, other countries that I've visited, such as the Dominican Republic, are very collectivist, and then modern Australia, North America, England are quite individualistic. From my perspective, Spain falls somewhere in the middle, but leaning more towards the collectivist side of the scale. In work settings, Spanish people tend towards group work and group collaboration in a very collectivist manner. I think they offer their help a lot more willingly as well. But obviously, just like many other cultures, including Australia, they place importance on family, friends, community, social inclusion, but I would say that they have a lot of value on personal freedom and independence as well. Alright, and the last big cultural difference is the commitment to times and plans. So, a common cultural difference is Australians being punctual and Spaniards being occasionally late or non committal with plans. Again, neither extreme is completely representative of all people of that culture, but I have seen the trend generally sort of move in this way. So it was weird for me at the beginning when some of my Spanish friends would arrive late to gatherings and parties but could somehow arrive on time for their jobs. And it's also counterintuitive because they do place more importance on socializing rather than work. It is something that I have gotten used to gradually, and now I like it. So generally we set an approximate time of when we'd like to arrive and what we'd like to do, and it's flexible. So it works for them and it works for me because we're all adults. We know that we're busy sometimes. Public transport doesn't work. Sometimes there's traffic, and if you arrive like a little bit late, it's not a big deal. So it works both ways. Sometimes my friends are late, and now sometimes I'm late. In the same way, cancelling or not following through with plans is also very flexible. I can't count the amount of times that it has been suggested that we get together or we do an activity and it just never quite ends up happening. Ultimately, it's flexible. So anyway, it's time to wrap up because I've been yapping for ages, but for me, these are some of the biggest cultural differences between Australia and Spain. In the future, I would like to do a video talking about some of the similarities and maybe some of the more nuanced differences, but to me, these ones are like the glaringly obvious ones. After 4 years living here, I have learned to be more flexible, more open, more collaborative, and definitely more patient. I've learned to not take things so personally, not take things so seriously, and I've been trying to chill out a little bit more. And honestly, I think exploring cultural differences is so valuable because it helps us understand each other better, question our own habits, and realize that there's not one correct or normal way to live or do things. So thanks for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.